Hi, this is me, the chess dummy, and to my right I have my friend Keaton Kiewra, who is an international master. He will be explaining confusing moves to me from the World Chess Championships where Magnus Carlsen and Nepomniachtchi are battling it out for the World Chess Champion title. Hope you enjoy, and happy learning everyone. So, I am a bandwagoner. I only started playing chess after watching the Queen's Gambit. So for me, I know you just, it's like the back of your hand. You're like, oh, of course, like the Ruy Lopez, the most common at the high level, which I've heard, but like all that stuff is very, very like loose knowledge for me. So the first move that I was very, very confused by is King F1.
Yeah, that's right. I remember this move. I think you're not alone. I think everyone was confused by that. I think the nature of the position is that white has a pawn, but black has compensation. I'm kind of a sucker for endgames, and especially in this kind of situation, I think I would want to get queens off the board. So I probably would just capture the queen in d5, more than likely, and just go to that endgame of pawn f. So why king f1? What does that move do? Well, it protects the rook on e1. So in what situation could that be important? Yeah, other than trading queens, like what would be the most logical move? Maybe knight c3? Just develop the knight and attack the queen. So what would black do on knight c3?
Well, on knight c3, the engine actually likes knight c3 for black because now queen takes.
Okay, so knowing about this threat for black helps to explain king f1 probably.
Right.
So I didn't realize that black was threatening queen takes e5.
With the discovery on the white queen, right?
Yeah, so for one thing, the king f1 helps because queen could take on b7, and there's no queen h2 with check, and that could be one difference. Oh, and the rook is protected, right? Which is what we already talked about. So, like, when queen takes on e5, you can't take on b7 because the rook is unprotected on e1. So king f1 protects the rook. So I think that's a big part of the reason why he played.
Right. Like, you're saying queen takes b7 doesn't work because this is just fully undefended?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Kind of anticipating queen takes e5. It's like a discovered attack, even though it's also like tactical defense because it's a hanging bishop on b7, right?
That's right. Now here's another interesting question. How quickly did he make the move? If he made it quickly, it means it's preparation. No one would quickly play king f1 without a lot of thought. So if he played it fast, that means he was still in his prep. If he didn't play it fast, then maybe he just looked at everything and decided that was the way to go. But I mean, this is only move 14, so it's definitely possible that a world-class player could still be in there. Does the engine think that king f1 is white's best move?
Yeah, the engine likes king f1, and then the second answer would be queen takes queen.
He probably already looked at this position with an engine.
Probably was prep.
So yeah, I'm guessing it was an engine. Yeah, that's kind of the case more and more. In these top level games, like most opening ideas are developed by engines.
So that's actually another good question from a novice to like a master, because I mean we were talking about this one day. Like you've literally traveled both growing up like across the nation and then also like internationally as well to compete in classical tournaments, right?
Yeah.
So when you're talking about opening prep, that means something totally different to me versus what you put into practice, right?
Yeah, well, although you had some pretty mean opening prep against me for our match, I remember. You definitely surprised me more than one occasion.
A blind squirrel can find a nut every now and then. But I appreciate you saying that. But at the same time, like you're saying, okay, like king f1 is an engine move, and like I've heard, okay, yes, like. You use the engine to help. But how's someone that's not a master use the engine to help improve and study openings? What does that actually mean, and how do you use that and apply it to your openings?
Well, that's a great question. The engine speaks a different language than we do. So in order to really use the engine as a tool for our growth, we have to be able to translate what the engine is saying into our language. So it's not enough just to know like what the engine recommends, because like when the engine recommends something, it's like important to really look at it and say, okay, well, why does the engine think this is the best move? And especially when it doesn't make sense to us, we really need to analyze and look at everything and look at all the possibilities. See, in chess, sometimes there's right and wrong, and sometimes there's splitting hairs. So the engine is really good when it's a right or wrong situation. When it's splitting hairs, the engine can be confusing and misleading.
Because a good answer is a good answer is a good answer, even though there are 3 different answers.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. We have position number 2. We have
G4.
Yes. This is the move that I was perplexed by.
This one I'm going to be much greater help than I was with King F1 because this is my kind of position and my kind of move.
Okay.
So the G4, I mean, first of all, it clears the back rank. So it's useful for white to, to make sure there's not a back rank threat.
Right.
He puts on a light square, which is kind of an alpha play, because if you want to play for a win in these kinds of end games, you want to put your pawns on the opposite color of your bishop, because then you're controlling more squares. Because you have a bishop that can control the dark squares, so the more light squares that you can control with your pawns, the more squares you can control, and the more squares you can control, the better chance you have to press for a win.
Right.
Also, it just takes more space than G3. It takes more kingside space, and there's no reason not to play it. I mean, if you look at the position, black has 0 chance of an here. I mean, like, both his rooks and the knight are at home. The white king's in no danger. It's going to sit very comfortably on G2. The G4 pawn is not a weakness. There's not a way that black can attack it. So it has no downside, and it has the upside of freeing the black rank, controlling the light squares, and taking king sides.
That all makes sense to me, but like I feel like chess is such a game of rules and exceptions.
Yes.
And this seems like it's a clear exception to the rule that I'm thinking of, which is like overextending pawns.
Mm-hmm.
What's the difference between overextending and controlling squares? Because this is exactly what you're saying. This is all about grabbing space and controlling squares. And it's interesting because you're saying that this is all about, this pawn is safe. And now that you say it, I'm like, maybe this pawn is safe because yes, there's only a dark square bishop and it's on a light square. The only route to win this would be to route this knight all the way over, and by then you can just push more pawns onto light squares. And the only file that's open for the rook to come and collect is covered by white's rook. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So I'm starting, the more I hear chess experts like Keaton say that, controlling space despite like pushing pawns so much, there's a fine line, but in this instance it's a safe push because it's so difficult for Nepo in this situation to come and collect.
Here's KD. Remember this principle. It's worth a lot of rating points.
Okay.
Something is only a weakness if it can be attacked. Very often, I have a lot of students who reject ideas like simply because they worry about creating a weakness in their position. So that might be a weak king, it might be a backward pawn, it might be an isolated pawn, it could be a doubled pawn, any number of things. If you have like a possibility with great upside, it's not enough to call yourself off it because it creates a weakness. You have to really, as long as the upside is there, you have to really look further and deeper and see like how, significant a weakness it can be, how costly of a weakness it's.
Right. So a true like calculated risk is ultimately what it comes down to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Are you ready for the next move? I'm kind of jumping around a little bit. We started with King F1 in game 1. We're moving over. We went to game 4 with G4 and we learned like a little bit about the overextending versus taking space and controlling more squares. This one is a confusing backwards bishop move in game 2. So I'm kind of rewinding the clocks, going back to game 2. But sometimes like backwards moves are the ones that trip up beginner and intermediate players the most. Sometimes you think, oh, gotta press forward. But every now and then, like the best move is going to be something going backwards, right? And this is one instance where I was lost on what the purpose was. So this is what perplexed me. What The heck was the purpose of bishop a8? So before you go, let me like kind of tell you like my side of it, just so you can see how stupid I am. And then you can like correct me. Typically, when I think about piece trades, I'm thinking if you can trade a very active piece for an inactive piece, the active piece is worth more. So my whole thought process here is, why did he go back with bishop a8, presumably to prevent the knight from taking, when this knight is on a great square? It's literally an outpost square, technically, right? And this bishop's blocked in by this pawn. Isn't this a inactive bishop versus a very active knight that's controlling a lot of squares in black's territory?
Yeah, you're definitely right that black would be very happy to trade that bishop for the knight. So it wasn't about trying to preserve the bishop from that trade. I think it was more that he doesn't want to leave it there under attack and like have it be a liability in the future. Because anytime you have a piece under attack, even if your opponent's not threatening to take it, it's something that you have to look over your shoulder for every move, right? Like, oh, if I do this, do I still have to worry about them taking it? So it's much easier psychologically to move the bishop to where it's not under attack, so that he doesn't have to continue to always be concerned about that capture. Also, like for example, if the bishop's on b7, white can go pawn takes pawn. White can play a takes b5. And then if black goes c takes b5, then indeed white can take the bishop on b7 because he'll have both his knight and his bishop aiming at that bishop. So I think white was threatening to play a takes b5. Because like in this case, like if takes takes and he goes knight takes b7, the rook on d1 will be hitting black's queen.
If this happens, you're saying pawn takes.
Mm-hmm.
And if pawn takes, the first move would be
knight takes b7.
Right. Rook defended by the queen. Hits this. So you can't really, I mean, if you take or take, but you're really just getting out of the way is ultimately what happens, right?
Yeah, and you'd lose a piece. So I think, yeah, bishop a8, it's not a very glamorous move, but it moves the bishop away. And it keeps the bishop on the diagonal that he wants, because then anytime the pawn moves from c6, the bishops will trade.
Mm-hmm.
And even though a8's a strange square, it is a good diagonal. Like, it's the best diagonal the bishop can be on, because black's c-pawn is mobile. It's not fixed on c6. And so that makes a big difference, because that means that black can move that pawn anytime he wants. And then as soon as black moves the pawn, then his bishop has the full diagonal. So it's a good move, I'd say.
This one, there's going to be a lot of conversation about this game. This is game 6, so the first game that Magnus won. There's one move in particular that I was confused by, and I never really see in my games, but when I asked my community, they all said that it's an imbalance that they've seen before. Nepo decided to play rook c8. And for me, I was so confused because, yes, like queen takes 2 rooks for...
You thought the 2 rooks should be much stronger than the queen?
Honestly, I was confused by both of them. Like offering the exchange and also taking the exchange. I was just confused by like what that meant and what it would create.
Okay. Well, I think that's a really good move and question to bring up then. So I actually did a video series a few years back on compensation for a queen. So it's something that I've studied quite a bit. There are a lot of different kinds of compensation for a queen. So what are the principles for having successful compensation for a queen? The first one is a safe king. When you're going against a queen, it's very important that your king should be safe, because the queen is so good at attacking and so good at like picking apart weaknesses in the opponent's position. So the first principle is you should have a safe king if you want to have a good compensation for a queen. The next part is you should have well-protected pieces, because again, the queen is so fast and so tricky, you really need your pieces to be well protected. So if you have those things, if your king is safe and your pieces are well protected, you already have a good chance to have enough compensation for a queen. If you want to push it over the edge and be better, to have the better position, you should also have coordinated pieces. So if your king is safe, your pieces are protected, and they coordinate, they really work well together, then you should have the better position most of the time.
So, question on that. What's the difference between coordinated pieces and well-protected pieces? I get what you're saying about well-protected pieces. You're saying, okay, like make sure nothing's like hanging because, you know, you can get forked pretty easily with the queen,
For
right?
the defensive consideration, whereas coordinated is more of an offensive or aggressive consideration.
Okay.
You want your pieces to be able to coordinate in order to do something, in order to attack, to do something productive, not just to defend.
Okay, like picking up a pawn or
It could be attacking weak pawns, or could be attacking the king, putting together some kind of active.
okay.
So yeah, queen for 2 rooks imbalance is a really significant imbalance. And yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, the position is probably about equal, but it's an imbalanced position. Now, Magnus really outplayed Nepo over the next several moves. And what he did a patented Magnus thing where he got it to a 2 results position. He got a position where, unless he blundered, which he never does, that either he was going to win or it would be a draw. So he got a 2 results position. And Magnus is the master of the 2 results position. He'll grind it until exhaustion. He'll never agree to a draw. He'll never rush. He'll never hurry. But he will find every single problem that he can pose to his opponent, and he will force them to play an absolutely perfect game to draw. And almost none of them, even the best players in the world, are up to that challenge.
I mean, that's quite literally like you're saying. He doesn't accept a draw, right? Like, I mean, this game went 130 plus moves.
Yeah. Magnus will never accept a draw if he's not at risk.
Wow.
Yeah, only if he's at risk would he consider it.
Gotcha. And that's what you're saying, a 2 result game is...
That means he's not at risk. Yep. So, yeah, that's exactly right. Now, this position is not a 2 results position. This is a 3 results position because there are pawns on both sides of the board, and because white's pawns on the queen side are targetable. So Nepo actually made a really scary pass pawn in this game that looked like it could be a really dangerous pass pawn and have potential to win black the game. So around this point, you know, the game still looks very unclear, but it went poorly for black, and white was able to eventually liquidate out the queen side. And once that happened, it became a 2 results game because white really couldn't lose. The 2 rooks are stronger than the queen when everything's on the same side of the board. The queen tends to be stronger when there's action on both sides of the board. So the liquidation to everything being on one side of the board was very much in the favor of the 2 rooks.
Okay, wait. So 2 rooks typically better when action is only on one side of the board?
Yeah, that's right. And really any kind of compensation for the queen, because the queen is just such a strong and fast piece that it's better the more chaotic the situation is. It thrives off of chaos. Whereas the compensation for the queen thrives off of stability. It's like, yeah, you have a queen, but what can you do with it? You don't have any targets. You don't have anything to attack. So when you're playing with the compensation for the queen, you need stability. The queen needs chaos. So when Magnus was able to liquidate everything to the same side, it was a very stable position. And so then the queen was out of work. There wasn't enough that it could do.
I see. So my guess is that that's true because the queen likes more chaos because it can cover such a big range and move in all the more directions. Like it's easier for the queen to take advantage of its mobility in an open and chaotic board.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's right.
Yeah.
So at the point where they went for the imbalance, the queen versus 2 rooks, I think Magnus had the better intuition, but it still took him 100 more moves for his intuition to prove to be true, right? So I think both players were taking a risk. I don't think either of them really knew how it was going to turn out, but both of them were willing to take a risk.
Even though, like you're saying, like we're still at not the same level as them, it was really cool to kind of go through like the premier level of classical chess games and have your perspective on it. So I really appreciate you doing the collab with me.
Oh, absolutely. A lot of fun.
People on YouTube, people on Twitch, follow Keaton Kiewra. I am Keaton87 on Twitch. He's also on Instagram, and he gives chess lessons, both individuals and group lessons. So check him out, and hope you have a good one. Happy learning.